We start with a point. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Imagining the 10th Dimension video blog with Rob Bryanton, and today's entry is called Time is in the Mind. Now I want to start out by putting up a link here to a video that shows an experiment that we're going to be talking about today. It shows some work done by neuroscientist David Eagleman of the University of Houston, looking into how different situations alter our perception of time, and how high-risk situations are particularly common for people to come away with the feeling that it was as if everything went into slow motion. What is the relationship between consciousness and the perception of time? I want to put up a link for you, and I'll put it in the description box attached to this video as well. It's to a recent article in New Scientist magazine that includes discussions of Dr. Eagleman's work called Time Warp: How Your Brain Creates the Fourth Dimension. And let me quote a few paragraphs from this piece, which was written by Douglas Fox. Eagleman wanted to know whether the brain's clock actually accelerates, making external events appear abnormally slow in comparison with the brain's workings, or whether the slow-mo is just an artifact of our memory. It's just one of the many mysteries concerning how we experience time that we are only now beginning to crack. Time, says Eagleman, is much weirder than we think it is. By understanding the mechanisms of our brain's clock, Eagleman and others hope to learn ways of temporarily resetting its tick. This might improve our mental speed and reaction times. What's more, since time is crucial to the perception of causality, a faulty internal clock might also explain the delusions suffered by people with schizophrenia. There's a few things I find very useful about what's being said in this article. First, we return to the old bugaboo about my way of visualizing the fourth spatial dimension and how that relates to time as being one of its two possible directions. In the context of this article, saying your brain creates the fourth dimension may seem like a confirmation of the ideas I'm promoting, but the critics who say that the fourth spatial dimension and time are two completely different things certainly show us that much controversy about all this remains. Which leads me to the other significant phrase: time is crucial to our perception of causality. This, for me, sums up quite neatly the difference between the fourth and the fifth dimension. When we look back at the chain of events that led to now, we perceive that there was only one path, and that's because of the limits of the fourth spatial dimension. I would say that in order for us to be able to conceptualize the multiple paths that extend before us from our current now, and likewise the multiple paths that potentially could have gotten us to this now we find ourselves in, we need to think beyond the comparatively simple limits of the fourth dimension. In other words, causality is the key to understanding a particular chain of events that connect from one position in the fourth dimension to another. And probability is the key to understanding how those 2 points have multiple connecting paths in the fifth dimension. Let's look at one more paragraph from the article that we're talking about here. Perhaps the most fundamental question neuroscientists are investigating is whether our perception of the world is continuous or a series of discrete snapshots like frames on a film strip. Understand this, and maybe we can explain how the healthy brain works out the chronological order of the myriad events bombarding our senses, and how this can become warped to alter our perception of time. This is an idea I keep returning to. Our reality is not continuous, despite what our common sense may seem to tell us. Whether we're talking about the Planck unit-sized atoms of space-time that loop quantum gravity tells us our reality is made from, or if we're talking about the illusion that the fifth dimension and above are curled up at the Planck length, an idea from string theory, because we only experience the fifth dimension one Planck frame at a time, the same conclusion can be drawn. And with this article, we see interesting new evidence of an idea we've talked about before, that the brain itself is also operating at a certain number of frames per second, rather than in a continuous undivided stream, and that ties into all my ongoing ramblings about the dimensions in very useful ways. Do you remember Dr. Stuart Hameroff and his theories showing that consciousness works at a certain number of bings per second, as he called them? We talked about this in Music and the Dance of Creativity. Boredom Unconsciousness 2, and Boredom Unconsciousness 3. As mentioned at the end of our first quote above, this leads us to some fascinating ideas about the relationship between this frame rate and what happens when this frame rate is out of sync with the body. We'll talk about this more in our next few entries: time and schizophrenia, consciousness in frames per second, and time in music. My name's Rob Bryanton. Enjoy the journey.